Well, this week on Fish and Tie, we're going to concentrate on bung flies. Yep, I know it's a dirty word in some people's opinion, but it's just another legitimate method of catching fish on still waters. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie the bung that I use, so I make my own bungs, and then I'm going to tie a few different flies that I would suspend under the bung. They won't be particularly long or hard ties, but they're just stuff that I find effective under the bung. So we'll start with the bung itself. Now, it's a long process, I'm not going to lie. It's probably easier to go and buy one of the Fario competition bungs or some of the other, I believe there's an Oreo one now that you just twist onto your line and it works really efficiently. But I'm going to show you how I tie mine. Now, the reason I tie my own bungs, or tie, model is probably a better description, is because in competition fishing you must have a catchable fly as your indicator. So that's why I've just got into the habit, and I like the way that it fishes, and that's how I do it. So I'm going to go through the building of the bung process, and then I'll intersperse that with tying flies, because making the bung does take a while and there's a bit of drying time in between phases. So that'll be a good opportunity to show you some of the flies. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, you can use whatever colour you like for your bungs. I sometimes use red foam. I've got some orange ones cut out at the moment, and I sometimes use a darker foam. Now, I always use the Uphaven HD foam blocks. They're fantastic. They really float high and they're solid. They're not like some of the foam blocks are a bit spongy, and I don't want that. I want it nice and solid. So the HD foam blocks are spot on for that. So basically what I do is get yourself a sharp knife. I'm using a Leatherman here, but it is particularly sharp. And I get the foam block. You don't have to be particularly accurate with this, so I never measure. I just kind of get it to the sort of length I want, start cutting very lightly, and then each cut goes a little bit deeper, and eventually, if you've got a sharp knife, it just comes straight off, and you've got this, which is what we're after. And then I'll put that foam block to the side, and then simply what we're looking to do is get the rough shape. So I'll get my ruler again, and then you end up with a cube like this. And then what I'm going to do is, for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to use some orange ones that I've cut out earlier, and as you can see, I've got them here. So what I'm going to do is just put this knife out the way to the side. What am I looking for? Yeah, so I've got my waste basket. I'm going to stick it on my bench, and I've got my little foam block that I've just cut there. And basically what I'm going to do is, with my rough scissors, so always use bad scissors or sickened scissors, whatever you want to call them, the ones you use to cut foam, wire, and things you shouldn't be cutting, like thread, you know, you wouldn't use your good scissors to cut foam, it just blunts them. So I'm going to take, first thing I do is take the edges off, like so. And then once I've got that done, I go round and take the hard edge off the end. Same with the other side. And then what I'm doing now, I've got this, as you can see, I've got this sort of rough shape, if you like, and what I want to do next is just tidy that up a little bit with the scissors. Now this might seem a convoluted way of doing your business, but it's just something I've got into the habit of doing, and it works for me. It's not like I'm having to make hundreds of them. When I'm fishing the bung, I tend to attach the bung to the fly line with some quite strong tippet, so 12 pounds, and I'm only using a short length. And then the flies, that I'm suspending below the bung are tied on usually around £8, £6, depending on the situation. I've went down as low as £4 on some fisheries because the fish are a little tippet shy. And if you've got that bung tied on with the 12-pound tippet, if a fish does snap you, it takes your flies, which you can live with because they're quick to tie. But when you lose one of these, it really does hurt. So I've got that rough shape now. What I'm going to do is grab my bodkin needle, just find the bit which way I want it to sit on the hook. So I'm looking for the best avenue. I'll put my bodkin needle in. Then I'm going to grab my lighter and I'm going to tidy this all up now. Now, when you're doing this, you've got to be careful that you don't over egg it. You don't want to overcook it. What you're trying to do is just seal the little foam egg. Take that off. While it's still quite warm, just rub it in your fingers. And you end up with this little badger here. As you can see, it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm only using this as an indication for the flies I'm fishing below it. So we can move our waste basket to the side now, and then what I want to do, I've got some remnants on my bench there, is I'm going to grab my knife. Now where I put my bodkin needle in, I'm just looking for the mark. That's where I wanted it to sit. And I've managed to seal it up just about. I can just about make it out there. Now you've got to be really careful, especially if you're using a scalpel or other sharp instruments. And you want to cut a slit in the foam. And basically, you're coming about halfway through the foam. Now, at this point, I don't need the knife anymore. I'm going to put that away, put it to the side. And then I'm going to just come in with my thumb and forefinger and just open that up so I've got this. And here's one I made earlier. You've got this slitted foam. So the hooks I like to use for the bung, it's quite important because you are going to need a wide gaped hook, and what I'm using is the Hanak H250s at size 8. As you can see, it's on a heavy wire, it's finished in bronze, but the main reason that I like this hook is look at the clearance I've got there, and that's really important. So first thing I'm going to do, and again this might not be necessary, but I like it. Some of the bungs I create, I don't bother with this stage, but the ones I'm creating for the new season, I always like to give it a bash. Now, recently, I watched a video that Steve Cullen did, and he mentioned that I use super glue quite a bit on my tying, and the reason I do that is because I like to use nano silks. I'm a huge fan of the nano silks, and also, you might have noticed, I use Hanak hooks all the time. Now, mostly Hanak hooks are finished in a black nickel, and I don't care how good your technique is, you cannot get nano silk with wax to stay on a black nickel hook without getting that body rotation. So I always put a little bit of super glue on. People were asking, but why can't you just use wax? That's the reason. Nano silk and black nickel, they just don't marry up. Although I'm using a bronze hook here, there's going to be a lot more super glue going on, so don't be worrying about it. So to this bung, I'm going to add a little tail, and it is very little because there's hardly any room. If you want to make it fit the competition gauge, you can hardly have any room at all. So I've got some orange marabou here, and I'm going to take a little bit just off the stem, and then just over my waste basket. I'll get rid of that, and then I can come in and tie that down. Just come in with my fingers, and then what I've got is a little tail for my bung. I have caught fish with my perch variation of this, and I can't claim any credit for this at all. It was, the idea came from Dave Murray. Many years ago he showed me how to fish the bung, and I've never looked back. This is just how I do it now. I don't like doing it, if I'm honest. I mean, it's not the most exciting way of fishing, but when it's effective, my goodness, it doesn't half catch a lot of fish. So I've got that in place now. I'm going to put it onto my hook. As you can see, my tail is tiny. Maybe a little too tiny, but we're going to go with that for the moment. And then the next thing I've got to do is cast this thread off. What I like to do is I'm using super glue here, and what I'm going to do is the front part, I'm going to get a layer of super glue onto my foam. And just get that fairly generous portion of super glue. And then I'm going to dress it up to the hook. Move back so I can get the eye on. Now, I'm not worried about hook clearance here. You've just got to have a hook, a catchable fly, and I've got that. Now, what I want to do now is just ensure that the eye of that hook is clear of super glue. You've still got to be able to tie it to a piece of tippet. So I'm going to come in with my feather and just put that through. Like so. So this will still fit in the competition gauge. It will float like a cork when it's finished, and it's ideal. The next thing then is I'm using one of my Mark Pettijohn clips, and I just want to take that off the vise. Then I'm going to put this to the side, and we'll then move on to a fly. Now, the first fly I'm going to tie is a Chenelle Worm. It's really effective under the bung, and one of the things I love about this one is it's as good on the rivers as it is on Stillwaters, so I use it for both in various different sizes. But today I'm going to tie you a size 14 Chenelle Worm. So let's get on and tie it. The hook in the vise is a Hanak H490 barbless hook. This is on a heavy wire and it's finished in black nickel. Now it's a jig hook, which I really like for this pattern. It works, and the reason I like it is it works just as well on both Stillwater and rivers. So first thing I'm going to do, as I just explained before, is get a tiny little spot of super glue onto the shank of the hook, and then I will just spread that around with my nano silk. I'm going to just get that bead seated in over the eye with several turns of silk, and then I can come up the shank of the hook. Now you can stop just approximately where a barb would be, and take away your excess. Now what I'm using for my chenille is Atomic Worm. This one's orange. It comes in various sizes, and we'll be coming back to this product a little later because I like it for one of the other flies I'll be tying later on this evening. So we'll take out a little bit of the chenille, and I'm going to just cut a small length off. I'll stick it back in the packet. Try and keep tidy. And then what I can do is, before I do anything else, is it's just like a fritz really, so it will unravel if you don't do something about that. And what I'm going to do is just melt the end just so it doesn't come undone. Now, as for length, it's up to yourself. I like to have approximately an inch, or maybe just a little over 2 centimetres if you're metric. And I'm going to get 1 turn in, 2 turn, 3 turn. Now, I forgot to mention I'm using nano silk. It's at 50D, which is quite thin. And I'm going to come round the back of the tail I've just created 3 times. And then I'll get myself in front of my material, come all the way back up to the bead, and then all I'm going to do is use that material to create the body of the fly. As tight a turns as you can get. You usually get about 4 or 5 turns in, and then on the last turn, really tightly nestle it into the bead. Then 1, 2, 3 to trap that material in place, and then I always put 2 or 3 turns in front of the material. Now you can, if you want, and I have tried this, is cut it here, seal it with a lighter, and then you've got your worm. But I like to have them just one tail hanging out, because what I find is sometimes the trout will come and hit the coloured bead rather than they're attracted by the movement of the fly, but they hit the coloured bead, which means you hook them up. Now, rather than having to go in later on and add varnish or glue to finish your fly, I put a little bit onto the nano silk and just whip finish. I mean, even with me explaining that to you, you can see how fast it is to tie this fly. And you know, if you do a lot of fishing, fast and quick's always preferable to long and slow. And if you lose the fly, you're not overly worried, you know, because you can just tie some more. So fishing this, now a lot of the fisheries I've been to, the small stillwater fisheries, they only allow you to fish 1 fly. So what I tend to do is just have this, and I'll have it, depending on the clarity of the water, I'll suspend it anywhere between 2 and 4 feet around it on small stillwaters, and that tends to work. On the larger reservoir, that's a completely different matter, and what I'll do later on in this video is put a diagram on with some suggested setups for fishing on reservoirs. So there we go, that's the Chenelle worm. It's proved very particularly efficient at Albury. Actually, it's done very well for me, and I dare say it'll do well for you at your fisheries, as long as you're not one of them bung snobs that said I won't do that, it's not fly fishing. But I'm only kidding. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. It really is up to you. But what we're going to do now is we're going to get on with our bung. So we'll take the Chenelle worm out, and if you recall, we left our bung in our little clip, and we've got it here. It's nice and dry now, so I'm going to bring it back to the vise. Now, what I could do is just finish this off. I use an orange marker, and I could just colour it in and seal it, and then that would be that. So why do I do this? And you might not see this. Even as I'm doing this, I can't see it. You know, the colour's hardly changing anything. But it does make a big difference when you come to finish the fly and seal it. So I use an orange pen. It doesn't need to be 100%, as I said. This is not trying to fool anybody. I just want it to show me when a fish has taken my fly or has shown interest in the fly. Because often, you know, people talk about the bung, and I don't care what anyone says, you know, guys call it noddy fishing, but there definitely is a skill to it. And Vice Flies, Callum, he did a cracking video on the bung. It might be worth jumping over to his channel after you finish watching this and checking it out. And he explains very well how different techniques using the bung can work. So I've coloured that in orange. I'm going to come back with my clip because I don't want orange fingers. And I'll just let that sit on the bench. And while that's drying, we'll get on with the next bung fly. The next fly then is the puddle bug. It can be done in a number of different colour configurations, but I'm going to use one of my favourites, which is chartreuse today, and let's get on and get it tied. The hook and the vise is a Hanak H330 barbless hook. This one's at size 10. It's finished in bronze and it's on a medium wire. Now, there's a little bit of faffing with this. So first of all, I'm going to start with nano silk. It's white nano silk at 50D, and again, a little touch of super glue just to get going. And why I like to use this is because the body itself is made of floss, and I don't like tying the materials in with floss. So again, I'm going to just get that bead secured. I don't like it moving about at the front there. So I'll just get my thumb and forefinger to hold it into place while I get some wraps onto the shank of the hook. And then I can come down the length of the shank. Don't worry about touching turns. This is all going to be covered up. Take away the tail. Now I'm going to bring my thread back up to the top, or near the top, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some marabou. Again, it's such a fantastic material for when it's in the water. Even the slightest movement, it bursts out and you get that movement. Superb material. It's one of the things, you know, if you were to make a list of 10 materials that you couldn't do without, this would definitely be on it. Maybe that's an idea for a video, you know. 10 materials I couldn't live without. Oh, I better write that down. Okay, so I've got my marabou. I'm just going to remove the thick bit and I'll dress it up to the shank of the hook. Now, once I've got this on here, I'm going to endeavour to keep the marabou on top of the shank. I don't want it wrapping round, so I'll keep a grip of it. And then once I've got that in place, I'll come all the way back up to the top, and I'm going to take, don't want a huge long tail, take that away. So you can imagine once that's wet and it's sitting in the water underneath your indicator, even if a fish swims past that, it's generating that kick with the marabou. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rib. Some people don't bother with ribs. I think it adds to the fly. I'm using some Semperfi silver wire at 2mm, gold wire, sorry, bright gold. So I'll catch that in. I'm going to put the wire into the slot of the bead, and then I'm going to bring it down all the way to where I finish my tail off. Just finding it difficult to see where that is with the light in my eyes here, but there we go, I've got it. Now what I'm going to do is just going to get several wraps over the top of this. With white, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to come in with another material. So I'm fairly happy with that. And I will just put a whip finish in to hold that into place. Again, these flies, they're not particularly difficult to tie, and they're not really time consuming. They're very quick flies. I don't know why the bung gets such a hard rep from some people, but yeah, it certainly does. So I've got fluorescent chartreuse here. It's a floss from Semperfi, and I'm going to catch in just behind the eye of the bead and start to get a layer down. Now before I get to the bottom, I'm going to remove my rat's tail. And I know what some of you will be thinking, and I'm going to answer that question in just a moment once I've got this body tied. Or I'll show you at the end, should I say. So you'll be saying, why have you started with nano silk? Why not just start with the straight floss? Now what I'm doing is just filling that gap that I had at the top here. I'll give it a little spin anti-clockwise, flatten it out. I like to get a nice tapered finish to the body. Now, the reason that I do all that prep work with a nano silk and don't just use floss. Floss is really thick, and if you did all that with floss, tying in the wing, tying in the rib, what would happen is you get too thick a fly then, or should I say you get a fly that looks like this. Here's one I've done where I've just used the floss, and I don't like it. It doesn't look right to me. So this is why I go through the pain of swapping out the white nano silk for the floss at the end. And because it's white, the floss also pops. Sometimes I use a little bit of plumber's tape if I'm of a mind to. So that last turn the wire, I'll get a couple of turns over. Now keeping some tension on your floss. Now you can't keep a lot of tension on the floss, but keep as much as you can, and just helicopter that away. Like so. Now I'm going to spin it up clockwise now to make it thinner. And then I'll get a little bit of varnish onto my floss. And just put 2 turns in. You don't need any more than that, and you don't want to thicken it up any more than that, if I'm perfectly honest. I like them quite nice and thin. So what I'm going to do next then, I'm going to lick my thumb and forefinger, because I forgot I've got a ramekin dish full of water right there, and just get that marabou tail slicked back, make sure it's out the way. I'm going to grab my UV resin. This is the Solaris Bone Dry. Now I'm not saying Solaris Bone Dry is the greatest resin in the world, because I'm sure there's others that are just as good. What I'm saying is there's not many or any that I've come across that do a brush like this. Look how thin that brush is. You can be really accurate with your application. And you can see as I'm, well, you can't see because I've not done your side yet, but as I work my way around the fly, you can see that the resin does make this green chartreuse puddle bug pop. It's a great wee pattern. It's also very good in orange. I use orange and white, and it works a treat. So once I've done that, I can come in with my UV pen and simply cure that off. And there we go. That's the puddle bug. So it's a great wee fly. This is probably a little large, but it's great for tutorial purposes. And I'm going to come on to size of flies when I'm tying the next fly. But in the meantime, let's go back to our bung and do the next stage. So we'll get the puddle bug out the vise and grab our bung. Now that highlighter pen or marker, should I say pro marker, has now dried. I'm not going to get any of that off on my fingers. And what I'm going to do now, and this is you don't need to do this actually, I just do it because I like it. It's something I've always done, so I stick to it. I'm going to be using some adhesive eyes just to give it the look of a small fry pattern. Now they can be a wee bit of a pain to get on. But I'll pop one on my side. I seem to have lost one in the packet. I've no longer got pairs. Maybe a Cyclops one for the future. And then I'll pop one on your side. Just look at that. From top down. Just make sure they're kind of even. And then what I'm going to do to finish this off is I'm going to coat the whole thing in resin. What this does is seals the whole fly and keeps them eyes nice and secure on the fly. If you don't do this, then what ends up happening, you lose your eyes after a few casts. They just come off. So I'll pop that on like so. I'm just going to put that to the side and cure this initially so the eyes don't go anywhere. It's fairly quick. I've only put quite a thin coat on at the moment, but it does hold it into place. I can put that to the side. Now, this takes a little bit of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do it and speed it up for you so that we're not here all day watching me painting a blob. So let me just speed this whole thing up for you now, and I'll be back in a minute. And there we go. Now, you can use varnish, just a thin coat of varnish to do the same thing, and you can even use super glue if you so wish. But you've got to seal that fly up. And then once it's done, that still feels a little bit tacky, probably didn't give it enough with the UV torch. You've now got your competition legal bung, and it's ready to go as your indicator. That's how I like to fish it. Even on the small still waters, what I do is I just tie it eye to eye. On the reservoirs, I tie it to the bend of the hook. But it's up to you. It's a lot of effort, but I find it quite rewarding and worthwhile. So, that's the bung. We've got our Puddle Bug and our Chenelle Worm. I'm going to tie another couple of flies for you, just to make sure you're fully armed if you decide to go out and give that bung a go. So, the next fly then. So we come to the last couple of flies. They're very quick ties, so I'm going to go through them fairly rapid. Now, when you're fishing the bung, especially at small still waters that see a lot of pressure from anglers, such as Albury, the solution's often to scale down, not just your flies, but your tippet. So on my recent visit to Western Lakes, I scaled my tippet down to £4. Now, if you're going to do something like that, then you really need to bring your kit down as well. There's no point in fishing £4 tippet on a 7-weight rod, because as soon as you strike, you're going to snap that tippet right off. So I was using a 4-weight, but a 5, or even maybe you might get away with a 6-weight, but I would be loath to go to a 6-weight, to be honest. A 5-weight's perfect. I just didn't have one with me on the day. So there's some flies that, what I've tied so far, they're going to get to depth very quick. So if you've set your depth at 3 foot, then that fly is going to get to that depth really quickly. Sometimes you don't want that. You want it to go a little bit slower. So what I'm going to tie now is a small, it's slightly weighted egg fly, because I do still want the fly to sink. With the material I'm going to use, if you don't, it'll take forever and a day. Your session would be over waiting for the fly to descend to the right depth. So we're going to tie a very small egg. Now, the hook in the vise is a Hanak H 330 barbless hook at size 16. It's finished in bronze and it's on a medium wire. Now, what I would say about the Hanak hooks as a general comment is whatever size they say, except for the dry fly hooks, they tend to be a wee bit smaller than your old money Camazan hooks. So this is quite a small hook. Now, the first thing I want to do is add my weight, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using some of this lead wire from Simplify. Now, you can get lead-free wire. I just don't have any at the moment, and usually I would use the lead-free wire. And what I want to do with this is just get a few turns of lead onto the shank. I suppose what I do like about the lead is it does break off very easily. So I'll just get this into a position where I can pull it away. It's quite difficult working with the smaller hooks and lead wire, but it does a job. So you can see there, I've only got 3 or 4 turns of lead wire on, and what I want to do next is add a touch of super glue. Not much, just enough as we're going to get a couple of wraps of thread on. I'm well back to the eye at this point. Now I'm keeping a hold of my rat's tail. I'm going to bring it round to the rear, and I'm going to bring it back round to the front here. And what this is going to do for me, hopefully, is hold that lead wire into place. Now I can take the rat's tail away. Doesn't need to be particularly tidy. And then what I'm going to do is keep that lead wire as wrapped as possible. It's not much weight, but it's just enough to just drop the fly through the water column. So what I'm using here, again, it's the Uphaven Atomic Worm, and it's Half-Life Pink. Now, I'm never really one for particular materials or colours. I just think if you get to the right depth and you get the right movement, the fish will take the fly, regardless of what colour it is or that. I'm not much for a pattern sort of person, if you like. But this stuff, this Half-Life Pink, for some reason, and it's probably to do with confidence, as most of fly fishing is, I'm really confident fishing this small egg. And it might be the size, it might be the material, but why mess with a formula? You know, if you're confident using something, then there is no need to be messing about with it. Although I tend to do that anyway. I'm always messing about with various bits and bobs that I should leave well alone, if I'm perfectly honest. Now, I've stopped my thread well back from the hook, and I'm going to bring it over, and I'm looking for around 3 turns, and then I can come in with my thread. Again, I'll get 3 turns over the chenille. I'll get a few turns in front. Come in with my scissors. And then once again, rather than try and go in after the fact, I'm just going to add a little bit of varnish to the thread. I mean, it looks like nothing. You certainly hard pressed to call it even a fly, but just so you get some perspective, I'll put my thumbnail up here, or I'll try. It's a tiny little fly, and even when it's only 2 or 3 feet below the bung, it's very difficult to pick out in the water. Cracking little pattern, and it's done me proud recently on visits to small stillwaters. So, egg flies, puddle bugs, and Chenelle worms, they're all very effective. I can think of several other flies that would work really well under a bung. I've fished apes worms under bungs and had some success with that. The chamois, I don't know if many of you have heard of the chamois, but I know it's one of Tim Joyce's favourite patterns and it works superb under a bung. So that's my small atomic egg. Let's get on and tie the last fly. The hook in the vise is a Hanak H150 barbless hook. It's at size 20, and as you can see, it's a dry and wet fly on a medium wire in black nickel. Now, as we talked about in the previous fly, scaling down is sometimes the way ahead, and there's a little bit of a story to this actually. Many years ago, when I was still learning the craft, and well, I'm still learning the craft now, but I went to a fishery, Jubilee Lakes, when I was just starting out on my journey, and I spent all day at the fishery for not even a touch. And as the day wore on, a gentleman arrived and he sort of pitched his stall maybe 20 feet away from me, and he could cast beautifully. I mean, it was just poetry in motion, and he was putting a long line out, and he was just catching fish after fish after fish. And eventually, I mean, I'm not backwards and coming forwards, so I approached him and said, look mate, I've been here all day, I've not caught a fish, can you tell me what you're doing? He said, oh, I did see you, you're not casting far enough for a start, because what happens is, like you say, you've been here all day with all these other guys that are down the lake, and they're thrashing the water to a foam, which pushes the fish out into the middle of the lake. So I'm simply getting to the fish in the first instance, says, and then I'm fishing with this. And he showed me this fly, I could barely see it, and that was when I was young. It was tiny, and it was on a size 20, and pretty much all it was black tyne thread, and he was just absolutely slaying fish, but just very small and getting the fly to where the fish were. I think some of these small stillwater fisheries, they see so much pressure that the fish just become reluctant to take a fly. So you've got to get your fly down to a tiny size, because that's what they're feeding on. So let's get on and tie this little fly. It is very, very simple, and it won't take long. So first of all, I'm using thread-wise, I'm using 70 UTC in black. You can use any black thread, but I like the UTC because it flattens out lovely. So I'm going to get about 2 or 3 millimeters onto the shank of the hook, and I'm going to take away my rat's tail. Now I'm going to use some silver wire. This is very, very thin. It's 0.004 silver wire, which is what you need for a fly this small. Do you actually need the silver rib? I'm not so sure, but I like to put it in just for a bit of contrast. So I'm going to catch that in on my side, and I'll come all the way back. Now, fishing the bung, if you're one of these people that think it's a dirty word and you don't want to do it, I fully respect your opinion. You know, that's up to you, that's a you thing. But if you're on the border and you just think, well, I don't know, I've never given it a try, I don't really think I'd be very good at it, it can be as easy as or hard as you make it. So bung fishing, some guys call it noddy fishing or that. There is a lot more to it than that, and I think Callum's video on vice flies does show that there's things you can do that will increase your chances of catching fish on the bung. So I'm just trying to keep my turns nice and even. It's a very small fly, and then I'll catch in that at the thorax. I don't feel the need to go any smaller than this, but I dare say it would work. And I've just come back and secured that wire in. I'm going to helicopter it away, and then I'm simply going to build up a small thorax. Now with this, if you're allowed to fish multiple flies, you can fish 3 of these at various depths, or 2, whatever your poison is, or whatever you're trying to achieve. But that's increasing your chances by covering different depths of water. So if you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to leave it a like. Consider hyping it if you're on a mobile phone. Just drop down and click that hype button. Really does help. And then I'll take that away. Now there's nothing to say you couldn't fish a combination of these flies. You know, maybe the Chenelle Worm on the point and then a couple of these small Midge patterns on the top dropper. So to finish it off then, I'm going to just get some super glue. Don't worry about the eye of the hook, I'll address that once I've got the fly completely lathered up in super glue. Now if you were being pernickety, you could give this several coats. I only give them one coat, they're very small. Now the difference between the little buzzer fly and the egg is the egg's got a much bigger footprint and is slower to sink. These little super glue flies will sink through the water quite quickly because of their profile. So we don't need to be worrying about the weight. I'll just come in with a little feather, clear the surplus super glue off the eye of the hook. And that little black one's done me proud over the years. I do also have them in olive and brown, but generally, you know, for example, I'll have 20 of these in my box. I might have 3 or 4 olive and I might have 3 or 4 brown, but this one does particularly well at the small Stillwaters. So there we have it. There's a few flies to use with a bung, and I've shown you my preferred bung option. I know there's lots of other good options out there that you can buy from shops, but I'm set in my ways. I like to fish with what I like to fish, and this is certainly a great wee bung, and you can see it from the moon. It's what I like about it. My old eyes, you know, if you've cast it at distance, you can see it. And the other thing I like is when you're retrieving your cast, this will cause a disturbance without actually twisting up the flies that you're fishing below it, which I also like. Not my best work, but it's difficult to do it on camera under the pressure of the lights and the stuff. It's not the best shaped one I've ever tied, but it's certainly usable. As I say, folks, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you're totally against the bung, please feel free to carry on fishing how you like, as long as you're enjoying yourself and fishing within the rules. But if you're on the fence, give the bung a go. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I'll see you all in the next one.